The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla made her way through the ancient hallways. She carried a small velvet box in her hands, clutched tightly against her chest. Inside lay a brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, a delicate piece featuring sapphires and diamonds arranged in the shape of a butterfly. This wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It held decades of royal history and personal meaning. Camilla had spent weeks thinking about this moment. Princess Anne's birthday was approaching, and she wanted to give her sister-in-law something truly special. Their relationship hadn't always been smooth. When Camilla first entered the royal family, Anne had been polite but distant. The Princess Royal was known for her no-nonsense attitude and fierce loyalty to her late mother. Camilla understood this completely. She never expected immediate acceptance or warm embraces. She simply hoped that time would build bridges between them. Over the years, something had shifted. Anne began to see Camilla not as an outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared for Charles and took her royal duties seriously. They discovered shared interests in horse riding and country life. Small conversations in hallways turned into longer discussions over tea. Respect grew into something resembling friendship. Now Camilla wanted to honor that connection with a gift that spoke volumes. The butterfly brooch had been one of the late Queen's favorites for daytime events. Elizabeth had worn it to garden parties, charity visits, and family gatherings. Camilla remembered seeing it pinned to her mother-in-law's jacket dozens of times. After Elizabeth's passing, the royal collection had been carefully catalogued and distributed according to her wishes. Some pieces went to Catherine, others to Sophie, and several were designated for Camilla's care. This particular brooch came with a note in Elizabeth's own handwriting, suggesting it might one day suit Anne perfectly. Camilla had been deeply moved when she discovered that note. It showed that Elizabeth had been thinking about her daughter, planning for future gestures of love even after she would be gone. The Queen Consort felt honored to be the one to fulfill this final maternal wish. She had the brooch cleaned and inspected by the royal jeweler. She selected special wrapping and wrote a personal card explaining its significance. Everything was ready for the small private gathering planned for Anne's birthday next week. As she walked through the castle, Camilla's mind wandered to the upcoming celebration. It would be intimate, just close family members and a few of Anne's dearest friends. No grand state occasion, no photographers, no formal protocols. Just people who genuinely cared for the Princess Royal sharing cake and conversation. Anne had specifically requested this type of gathering. She never enjoyed being the center of attention despite spending her entire life in the public eye. The castle was unusually busy that morning. A state visit was being prepared for the following month, and staff members rushed about with clipboards and measuring tapes. New security protocols were being tested. Guards who normally stood at familiar posts had been temporarily reassigned to different locations. Camilla noticed several unfamiliar faces among the security team. She made a mental note to ask about the new arrangements later. She turned down a corridor that led to her private study. This was where she kept personal correspondence, family photographs, and small treasures that didn't belong in the official royal collection. The butterfly brooch would stay in her desk drawer until the birthday celebration. She wanted to keep it close, to look at it occasionally and remember the kind gesture Elizabeth had planned. As Camilla approached her study door, a young guard stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old, with crisp uniform and earnest expression. She'd never seen him before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, standing at attention with military precision. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm but polite. "I need to inspect any items being brought into this wing of the castle." Camilla paused, slightly surprised. Security checks were common, but not usually at this internal location. She assumed this was part of the new protocols being tested. "Of course," she replied with a gentle smile. She was accustomed to security measures and never took offense at them. The royal family understood better than anyone the importance of vigilance. The guard stepped closer and gestured toward the velvet box. "May I see what's inside, ma'am?" Camilla hesitated for just a moment. The brooch was precious, and she felt oddly protective of it. But she understood duty and protocol. She carefully opened the box, revealing the glittering butterfly nestled in white silk. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the jewels. He reached for his radio and spoke quietly into it. Camilla couldn't hear exactly what he said, but she caught fragments about verification and clearance. She waited patiently, still holding the open box. After a brief conversation on his radio, the guard turned back to her. His expression had changed. He looked uncertain now, as though he'd received instructions he didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," he said, his voice less confident than before, "but I've been instructed to secure this item for verification. There's been some concern about valuable pieces being moved without proper documentation." Camilla's smile faded. She felt a flutter of confusion in her chest. "I beg your pardon?" "The item needs to be logged and verified before it can be taken to private quarters," the guard explained, clearly uncomfortable but trying to follow his orders. "It's part of the new security measures. All pieces from the royal collection must be tracked." The queen consort's confusion began shifting into something else. This was absurd. She wasn't stealing crown jewels or smuggling artifacts out of the castle. This was a personal gift, carefully chosen and properly obtained. She had every right to move it wherever she wished within the castle walls. "Young man," she said, her voice still controlled but with an edge creeping in, "I am quite aware of security protocols. This brooch was entrusted to my care, and I am taking it to my private study. There is no issue here." The guard shifted his weight uncomfortably. He glanced at his radio as if hoping for divine intervention. "I understand, ma'am, but my orders are clear. Any valuable items must be secured and verified. If you could just let me take it to the security office for logging, it will be returned to you within the hour." He reached out his hand expectantly, waiting for her to surrender the velvet box. Camilla stared at his outstretched hand in disbelief. The absurdity of the situation suddenly crystallized in her mind. This guard, who clearly didn't recognize the full context of what was happening, was asking her to hand over a precious gift meant for Princess Anne. He wanted to take it away, log it in some computer system, and return it within the hour as if it were lost property. Something snapped inside her. All the careful planning, the emotional significance of the gift, the trust Elizabeth had placed in her to deliver this brooch to Anne, it all came rushing forward. Her patience, usually so abundant, reached its limit. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer gentle. The warmth had evaporated, replaced by something cold and sharp. "Absolutely not," Camilla said firmly. "You will not be taking this brooch anywhere." The guard's hand remained extended, hovering in the air between them. He looked genuinely confused now, caught between his orders and the reality of a queen refusing to comply. "Your Majesty, I must insist," he stammered. "The protocols are quite clear about this. I could lose my position if I don't follow proper procedure." Camilla's eyes narrowed. She understood the young man was trying to do his job, but the situation had gone too far. She had been patient with security measures throughout her years in the royal family. She had smiled through countless bag checks, stood still for security wands, and provided identification when required. She never complained because she understood the necessity. But this was different. This was personal, and it was unnecessary. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice cutting through the corridor like a blade. "Officer Matthews." "Ma'am," he replied, standing even straighter as if good posture might save him from this increasingly uncomfortable conversation. "Officer Matthews, I want you to listen very carefully," Camilla said, taking a step closer to him. Her small frame seemed to grow larger with authority. "This brooch belonged to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It was entrusted to my personal care with specific wishes about its future. I am taking it to my private study where it will remain until I present it as a gift to Princess Anne. There will be no logging, no verification, and certainly no removal to any security office. Do you understand?" Matthew's face had gone pale. He lowered his hand slowly, but his jaw remained set with stubborn determination. Someone had given him orders, and he clearly felt bound to follow them regardless of the consequences. "With respect, Your Majesty, my commanding officer specifically told me that no exceptions could be made," he said, "even for family members. The security concerns are very serious right now." Camilla felt heat rising in her chest. Family members. She wasn't just a family member. She was the queen consort of the United Kingdom. She had stood beside Charles through his accession to the throne. She had taken on hundreds of royal duties and represented the crown at countless events. And now this young guard, barely out of training, was treating her like a suspicious visitor trying to sneak valuables out of a museum. "Who gave you these orders?" she demanded. Matthews hesitated. He clearly didn't want to throw his superior under this particular bus, but Camilla's gaze was unwavering. Captain Thornberry, ma'am, he finally admitted. He's overseeing the new security implementations. Camilla knew the name but had never met the man personally. Thornberry was relatively new to the Royal Protection Detail, brought in specifically to modernize security protocols. She'd heard he was efficient, but lacked understanding of the nuances required when working within the royal household. This situation was proving those whispers correct. "Get Captain Thornberry on your radio immediately," Camilla commanded. "I want to speak with him right now." Matthews fumbled with his radio, his earlier confidence completely shattered. He made the call, speaking quickly and quietly. Within moments, a gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "Thornberry here. What's the situation, Matthews?" Before the young guard could respond, Camilla stepped forward and spoke directly toward the radio in his hand. "Captain Thornberry, this is Queen Camilla. Your officer has just attempted to confiscate personal property from my possession under the guise of security protocols. I would very much like an explanation for this extraordinary behavior." There was a long pause on the other end of the radio. Camilla could imagine Thornberry's face as he realized the magnitude of the situation his new protocols had created. "Your Majesty," Thornberry's voice came through, noticeably more careful now. "I apologize for any confusion. The new security measures are meant to prevent unauthorized movement of valuable items from the royal collection. There have been concerns about proper documentation." "Concerns?" Camilla repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. "Concerns about whether I, the Queen Consort, can be trusted with jewelry that was specifically placed in my care? Concerns about whether I might be stealing from my own home?" "Of course not, ma'am." Thornberry backtracked quickly. "The protocols aren't meant to suggest any impropriety on your part. They're simply blanket measures designed to track all items for insurance and historical purposes." Camilla closed her eyes briefly, trying to maintain her composure. She understood the reasoning behind documentation and tracking. The royal collection was priceless, both monetarily and historically. Proper records were essential, but there were ways to handle such things, and ambushing the Queen Consort in a hallway was not one of them. "Captain Thornberry," she said, her voice becoming dangerously quiet, "if you wish to implement new tracking systems for the royal collection, then you schedule appointments with the appropriate household members. You send memos. You arrange meetings. You do not instruct guards to physically take items from members of the royal family, as if we were shoplifters caught at Harrods." Through the radio, she heard Thornberry clear his throat uncomfortably. "Yes, ma'am. I can see how the implementation may have been too aggressive. I will revise the protocols immediately. You will do more than that," Camilla continued. "You will personally apologize to Princess Anne for this incident." There was confusion in Thornberry's voice when he responded. "To Princess Anne, ma'am? I'm not sure I understand." Camilla's anger, which had been building steadily, finally found its full voice. "This brooch is intended as a birthday gift for the Princess Royal. It was chosen specifically because it belonged to her mother, and because her late Majesty wished for Anne to have it. Your ham-fisted security theater has disrupted something deeply personal and meaningful. It has turned a moment of family connection into a bureaucratic nightmare. So yes, you will apologize to Anne, because your actions have affected her just as much as they've affected me." Officer Matthews, still standing awkwardly with the radio in his hand, looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. He had clearly never witnessed anything like this during his brief time at the castle. Camilla wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened and weeks of small frustrations with the new security measures came pouring out. "Since you arrived, Captain Thornberry, everything has become unnecessarily complicated," she continued. "Guards suddenly appearing in private corridors, family photographs being questioned as if they might be state secrets, my personal mail being delayed for inspection. I have tolerated these changes because I was told they were necessary for our safety. But this is not security. This is security theater that serves no purpose except to make everyone's life more difficult." She paused to catch her breath, aware that her voice had risen considerably. Staff members had appeared at the edges of the corridor, drawn by the commotion but maintaining a respectful distance. This would be all over the castle by tea time, she realized. The Queen Consort rarely raised her voice, so when she did, people noticed. Captain Thornberry's voice came through the radio again, considerably more subdued than before. "Your Majesty, I sincerely apologize." This was a failure in communication and common sense. Officer Matthews was simply following orders, but those orders were clearly inadequate for this situation. "I take full responsibility." Camilla looked at young Matthews, who was staring at his boots as if they were the most fascinating objects in the world. Despite her anger at the situation, she felt a twinge of sympathy for him. He was just doing what he'd been told. The real problem lay with whoever had created these rigid protocols without considering the human element of royal life. "Officer Matthews," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You may go. This isn't your fault. But in future, I suggest you use your judgment alongside your orders. Rules are important, but understanding context is equally vital." The young guard nodded gratefully and hurried away, clearly relieved to escape the situation. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Camilla spoke into the radio one final time. "Captain Thornberry, you and I will have a proper meeting tomorrow morning to discuss how these protocols can be improved. For now, please ensure that all guards are informed that members of the royal family are not to be treated as security threats in their own home. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, ma'am," Thornberry replied. "Again, my sincerest apologies." She handed the radio back to the empty air, suddenly realizing Matthews had already left. She smiled grimly at this small absurdity on top of all the others. The staff members who had gathered at the corridor's edges began to disperse, sensing the drama was over. Camilla stood alone in the hallway, still clutching the velvet box with the butterfly brooch. Her hands were shaking slightly. She wasn't accustomed to confrontation, especially not public ones. Throughout her time in the royal family, she had cultivated a reputation for being calm, steady, and diplomatic. She smoothed over difficulties rather than creating them. But sometimes she thought certain lines needed to be drawn. Some moments required a firm response. She continued to her study, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The familiar room welcomed her with its warm wood paneling and comfortable furniture. This was her sanctuary, the place where she could be herself without cameras or protocols. She sat down at her desk and placed the velvet box in front of her. Opening it again, she looked at the butterfly brooch. The sapphires caught the light from the window, sparkling with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. Elizabeth had loved this piece. Camilla could picture her mother-in-law wearing it. Could remember specific occasions when the butterfly had been pinned to a blue jacket or a cream-colored dress. She picked up the note that Elizabeth had written, reading the familiar words again. "This piece has always reminded me of Anne's spirit, delicate in appearance but remarkably strong and enduring. I hope she will treasure it as I have." Camilla felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The confrontation with the guard had been about more than just security protocols. It had been about protecting something precious, something that connected past to present, mother to daughter. Elizabeth had planned this gesture with love and thoughtfulness. Camilla had been entrusted to carry it out. No overzealous security officer was going to prevent that from happening. She thought about Anne, wondering what her sister-in-law's reaction would be when she received the gift. The Princess Royal wasn't overly sentimental about material things. She was practical, focused on duty rather than displays. But Camilla suspected that something from her mother, especially with such a personal note, would touch her deeply. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, quickly wiping her eyes. Charles entered, his face creased with concern. "I heard there was some sort of incident in the corridor," he said, coming to sit beside her desk. "Are you all right?" Camilla let out a long breath. "Your new security captain apparently thinks I might abscond with the crown jewels," she said, managing a weak smile. Charles listened as she recounted the entire encounter. His expression grew increasingly troubled as the story unfolded. When she finished, he shook his head in disbelief. "Thornberry is efficient, but he lacks subtlety," Charles said. "I'll speak with him myself. These protocols need to be sensible, not oppressive." "I've already arranged a meeting for tomorrow," Camilla replied. "We'll sort it out." But Charles, I was quite forceful with him. I may have been harsher than necessary. Charles reached over and squeezed her hand. "You defended something important. There's no shame in that. My mother would have done exactly the same thing if someone had tried to interfere with a gift she'd planned." Camilla smiled at this. She knew it was true. Elizabeth had been gracious and patient in public, but she could be absolutely formidable when the situation required it. Perhaps that was one of the lessons Camilla had learned during their years together, knowing when to be gentle and when to stand firm. "What matters now?" Charles continued. is that Anne's gift is safe and the message will be delivered as Mother intended. That's what this was really about, wasn't it? Camilla nodded. I just want her to know how much her mother loved her. How much thought went into this gesture. It's not about the monetary value of the brooch. It's about the love behind it. Charles stood and kissed the top of her head. Anne will understand that perfectly. She always valued our mother's thoughtfulness more than grand gestures. This will mean everything to her. After Charles left, Camilla sat quietly in her study for a long while. She thought about family, duty, and the complicated dance of royal life. Everything they did was observed, analyzed, and often misunderstood. A simple act like moving a brooch from one room to another could become a security incident. A planned gift could turn into a confrontation in a corridor. But beneath all the protocols and procedures, they were still a family. They still celebrated birthdays, exchanged gifts, and tried to show each other love in meaningful ways. The trappings of royalty sometimes made those simple human moments more complicated, but they didn't make them any less important. She carefully closed the velvet box and placed it in her desk drawer. It would stay there safe and sound until Anne's birthday. No more inspections, no more verifications, no more interference. Just a gift waiting to be given, carrying with it a mother's love and a sister's respect. As evening approached, Camilla received a formal written apology from Captain Thornberry. It was properly worded and seemed genuinely contrite. She accepted it graciously as she accepted most things. Tomorrow's meeting would be constructive rather than punitive. They would find a way to maintain security without sacrificing the human element that made royal life bearable. She drafted a brief note to Anne, asking if they might have tea together the day before the birthday celebration. She didn't mention the incident with the guard or the upcoming gift. Those details would come in time. For now, she simply wanted to connect with her sister-in-law to strengthen the bond they'd built over the years. That night, as Camilla prepared for bed, she reflected on the strange day. She'd never imagined that giving a gift could require such determination, but perhaps that made the gesture even more meaningful. She had fought for it quite literally because it mattered. The following morning arrived with gray skies and light rain, typical for England at this time of year. Camilla woke early, her mind already turning to the meeting with Captain Thornberry. She dressed carefully in a navy suit, choosing her attire with the same thought she gave to all her public appearances. Even a private meeting within the castle walls required appropriate presentation. Over breakfast, Charles mentioned that he'd spoken with several senior household staff about the security incident. Word had indeed spread quickly through the castle, as Camilla had predicted. The general consensus seemed to be that the new protocols had been implemented too rigidly, without adequate training on how to handle sensitive situations involving family members. Thornberry means well, Charles said, buttering his toast, but he comes from a military background where orders are absolute. He hasn't quite grasped that running security for a royal household requires more finesse. Camilla sipped her tea thoughtfully. I don't want to be too hard on him. The castle does need proper security, especially with all the state visits and public events we host. I just want to ensure that security serves us rather than ruling us. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in one of the castle's smaller conference rooms. Camilla arrived precisely on time to find Captain Thornberry already waiting, standing at attention despite the informal setting. He was in his late 40s with iron-gray hair and the kind of rigid posture that spoke of decades in military service. Your Majesty, he said, bowing slightly as she entered, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Please sit down, Captain, Camilla said, gesturing to the chairs around the conference table. Let's have a civilized conversation about how we can improve things. Thornberry sat, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable. He had brought a folder filled with documents, which he placed on the table in front of him like a shield. I've prepared a full report on yesterday's incident, he began, including my recommendations for revised protocols going forward. Camilla held up her hand gently. Before we get into formal reports, I'd like to understand your thinking. What prompted these particular security measures? Thornberry seemed taken aback by the question, as if he'd expected immediate criticism rather than genuine inquiry. He gathered his thoughts before responding. There have been several incidents at other royal residences across Europe, he explained. Items disappearing from collections, sometimes turning up at auction houses years later. The insurance companies have been pushing for better tracking systems. When I was brought in to modernize security here, Implementing inventory controls was one of my primary mandates. Camilla nodded slowly. I understand the concern. The collections are irreplaceable, both historically and monetarily. But surely there must be ways to track items without treating family members as potential thieves. Of course, ma'am, Thornberry agreed quickly. That was never my intention. I can see now that my protocols were far too blunt an instrument for the nuanced environment of the royal household. In the military, we deal with absolutes. Everyone follows the same rules regardless of rank when it comes to security. I applied that same thinking here, which was clearly a mistake. Camilla appreciated his honesty. It took courage to admit errors, especially to someone of higher rank. What if we approach this differently? She suggested. Rather than surprise inspections and mandatory confiscations, what about a simple logging system? When someone from the family wishes to move an item from the collection, they could fill out a brief form noting what it is and where it's going. Nothing invasive or accusatory, just a record for insurance purposes. Thornberry's face brightened slightly. That would certainly be more practical. We could develop a digital system, perhaps an app that makes the logging process quick and painless. And crucially, Camilla added, it would be based on trust. We're not criminals being monitored. We're responsible caretakers of these pieces, and we should be treated as such. They spent the next hour working through various scenarios and developing more reasonable protocols. Thornberry proved surprisingly open to suggestions once he understood the cultural context of the royal household. His military precision, properly channeled, could actually be an asset rather than a hindrance. As the meeting concluded, Camilla felt satisfied with the progress they'd made. Captain, I appreciate your willingness to adapt, she said. Security is important, but so is maintaining a home rather than a fortress. I understand that now, ma'am, Thornberry replied. I apologize again for yesterday's incident. I've learned a valuable lesson about balancing security needs with human considerations. After Thornberry left, Camilla sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. She thought about leadership and how easy it was to implement rules without considering their full impact. Thornberry had meant well, but good intentions without proper understanding could create unnecessary problems. She returned to her study and checked the schedule for the rest of the week. Anne's birthday celebration was approaching quickly. Beyond the private family gathering, there were several other commitments to manage. A charity event on Tuesday, a visit to a children's hospital on Wednesday, and various meetings with patronages and organizations. Her phone buzzed with a message from Anne herself. Heard you gave young Matthews quite a fright yesterday. Should I be worried about receiving stolen goods at my birthday? Camilla laughed out loud at this. Anne's dry sense of humor was one of her most endearing qualities. She typed back, the goods are entirely legitimate. The security officer, however, may need retraining. Anne's response came quickly, looking forward to tea tomorrow. And to hearing the full story, which I'm sure is better than the castle gossip version. The next afternoon, Camilla met Anne in one of the smaller sitting rooms typically reserved for family use. It was a cozy space with comfortable furniture, personal photographs, and none of the formal grandeur of the staterooms. Anne arrived wearing riding clothes, having come directly from the stables. Don't worry, I'm not sitting on the good furniture until I change, Anne said with a grin, heading toward the adjoining washroom. She emerged a few minutes later in casual clothes, her hair still slightly windswept. They settled into their chairs with tea and biscuits between them. Anne looked at Camilla with amused eyes. So tell me about your confrontation with Captain Thornberry's overzealous minion. Camilla recounted the entire incident, including her frustration, her raised voice, and poor Officer Matthews's obvious terror. Anne listened intently, occasionally shaking her head or smiling at particular details. Mother would have handled it exactly the same way, Anne said when the story concluded. She was always so patient with protocols and procedures until someone crossed a line. Then she became absolutely immovable. I've been thinking about that, Camilla admitted, about how she balanced grace with firmness. It's something I'm still learning. Anne looked at her thoughtfully. You know, when you first became part of this family, I wasn't sure what to think. Not because of you personally, but because change is difficult. Mother was such a constant presence, and it felt strange to imagine someone else in that role. Camilla nodded, understanding completely. I never wanted to replace her. No one could. I know that now, Anne continued. What I've come to appreciate is that you're not trying to be her. You're finding your own way of doing things, your own style. Yesterday's incident is a perfect example. You stood up for something important, not because you were mimicking Mother's approach, but because it genuinely mattered to you. Camilla felt unexpectedly emotional at these words. Acceptance from Anne meant a great deal, perhaps more than she'd fully realized until this moment. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. They discussed Anne's upcoming royal engagements, shared stories about their horses, and even ventured into the occasionally frustrating world of palace politics. There was a comfortable rhythm to their interaction now, built on years of gradual understanding and mutual respect. As their tea together drew to a close, Anne stood to leave. "Thank you for this," she said simply. "These quiet moments are becoming rarer as we all get busier." "I value them. So do I," Camilla replied warmly. "I'll see you at the birthday gathering. It should be lovely." After Anne left, Camilla returned to her study and opened the desk drawer containing the velvet box. She took out the butterfly brooch and held it up to the light. The sapphires seemed to glow with inner warmth. She could picture Anne wearing it, the butterfly perched on her jacket during one of her countless public appearances. The days leading up to the birthday celebration passed quickly, filled with the usual assortment of royal duties. Camilla attended the charity event, where she gave a speech about literacy programs in rural communities. The visit to the children's hospital was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, as such visits always were. She met brave young patients fighting serious illnesses and left feeling humbled by their courage. Captain Thornberry's revised security protocols were rolled out quietly throughout the castle. The new system was exactly as they'd discussed, a simple digital logging process that required minimal effort and treated everyone with respect. Officer Matthews, who had been understandably nervous about encountering Camilla again, received a personal note from her assuring him that she held no grudge. He nearly cried with relief when he read it, according to castle gossip. Anne's birthday celebration was scheduled for Saturday afternoon in one of the private family rooms. The guest list included Charles and Camilla, Anne's children and grandchildren, and a handful of Anne's closest friends, who'd been part of her life for decades. The atmosphere was deliberately casual, just as Anne had requested. Camilla arrived early to help with final arrangements. The room had been decorated simply but elegantly with flowers from the castle gardens. A birthday cake sat on a side table, decorated with fondant horses in honor of Anne's lifelong passion for riding. Gifts were placed on a nearby chair, wrapped in various papers and ribbons. Camilla added the velvet box to the pile, though she'd wrapped it differently from the others. The paper was a deep blue that matched the sapphires inside, and she'd attached the note from Elizabeth to the outside of the package. This gift deserved to stand apart from the others. Guests began arriving, bringing with them the cheerful noise of family gatherings. Anne's grandchildren ran about with the endless energy of youth, while the adults settled into conversations about everything and nothing. Charles acted as unofficial bartender, pouring champagne for those who wanted it and juice for the younger set. Anne seemed genuinely happy, which wasn't always easy to achieve with someone as naturally reserved as the Princess Royal. She laughed at stories shared by old friends, played briefly with her grandchildren, and accepted birthday wishes with characteristic grace. When it came time for gifts, Anne protested that it wasn't necessary, but everyone ignored her complaints. She opened presents one by one, exclaiming over each thoughtful choice. There were books she'd mentioned wanting to read, accessories for her horses, a new waxed jacket for country walks, and several framed photographs capturing special family moments. Finally, only the blue-wrapped box remained. Anne picked it up, immediately noticing the note attached to the outside. Her eyes widened as she recognized her mother's handwriting. She looked up at Camilla with a question in her eyes. "It's from your mother," Camilla said softly. "She left instructions about this piece, wanting you to have it." The room had grown quiet. Everyone sensed that this gift was different from the others, that it carried weight beyond material value. Anne carefully removed the note and read it, her eyes misting as she took in her mother's words. She opened the velvet box slowly, revealing the butterfly brooch nestled inside. For a long moment, Anne simply stared at the piece. Camilla watched her face, seeing the play of emotions there. Surprise, recognition, grief, love all mingling together. Anne lifted the brooch from its box, holding it up to catch the light just as Camilla had done days before. "I remember this," Anne said, her voice thick with emotion. "She wore it to my daughter's christening, and to that garden party where it rained and we all got soaked, but she insisted on staying because people had traveled so far to see her. She wore it on happy occasions," Camilla added, "days when she felt particularly joyful." Anne carefully pinned the butterfly to her jacket right over her heart. "It's perfect," she said, and there were tears now, unashamed and unwiped. "Thank you for making sure I received this. I know it couldn't have been easy to let go of something so precious." Camilla felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "It wasn't mine to keep. It was always meant for you. Your mother planned this gesture with love, and I was honored to carry it out." Charles came to stand beside his sister, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mother had a way of thinking ahead, of planning moments that would matter even after she was gone. The gathering continued, but the mood had shifted into something deeper and more meaningful. Conversations became more reflective, touching on memories of Elizabeth and the ways she'd shaped all their lives. Anne kept touching the brooch throughout the afternoon, as if needing to confirm it was really there. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Anne pulled Camilla aside. "I heard about what happened with the guard," she said quietly. "About how you refused to let them take this brooch away for inspection." Camilla felt slightly embarrassed. "I may have been a bit forceful in my response." "Good," Anne said firmly. "Some things are worth fighting for. This brooch represents my mother's love and her thoughtfulness. The fact that you stood up to protect it means more to me than I can adequately express." "I understand what it's like to lose a mother," Camilla replied. "These connections to her, these tangible reminders of her love, they're precious beyond measure. No security protocol is more important than that." Anne embraced her then, a rare display of physical affection from someone not naturally demonstrative. "You found your place in this family," Anne said. "Not by trying to fill Mother's shoes, but by being authentically yourself. That takes courage, and I respect it enormously." After everyone had left and the room had been cleared, Camilla found Charles waiting for her. They walked together through the castle corridors, their footsteps echoing in the quiet spaces. "That went well," Charles observed. Anne was truly moved by the gift. "Your mother planned it perfectly," Camilla said. She knew exactly what would matter most to Anne. They passed the spot where Officer Matthews had attempted to confiscate the brooch just days before. Camilla smiled at the memory, no longer feeling the anger that had surged through her at that moment. The confrontation had served a purpose. It had forced necessary conversations about security protocols. It had revealed the strength of her commitment to honoring Elizabeth's wishes, and it had become, in an odd way, part of the story behind the gift. "I've been thinking," Charles said, breaking into her thoughts, "about how you've navigated this role. It can't have been easy, stepping into a position with such history and expectation." "Some days are harder than others," Camilla admitted, "but today was a good day. Seeing Anne's face when she opened that gift, knowing your mother's love reached across time to touch her daughter, that made everything worthwhile." The following week brought a return to normal routines, though the incident with the brooch continued to resonate in small ways throughout the castle. Staff members spoke about it in hushed tones, not with criticism but with a kind of approval. The Queen Consort had shown backbone, they said. She'd stood up for something important rather than simply accepting whatever was demanded of her. Officer Matthews requested a private audience with Camilla, which she granted. He arrived at her study looking nervous but determined. When she welcomed him in, he stood at attention and delivered what was clearly a carefully rehearsed apology. "Your Majesty, I wanted to apologize personally for my handling of the situation with the brooch," he said. "I was following orders, but I should have used better judgment. I should have recognized that security protocols must be balanced with common sense and respect." Camilla gestured for him to sit, which he did reluctantly. "Officer Matthews, you were put in an impossible position. You were given orders that were too rigid for the circumstances. What matters is what we all learned from the experience." "I've learned a great deal, ma'am," Matthews said earnestly. "Captain Thornberry has been working with all the guards to help us understand the difference between security threats and simple family situations." We're being trained to think more critically about when to apply strict protocols and when to exercise discretion. That sounds like excellent progress, Camilla replied. The royal household requires security, absolutely. But it also requires people who can navigate complex social situations with intelligence and sensitivity. You're clearly capable of both. Matthews looked relieved and grateful. Thank you, ma'am. If I may say so, the story of what happened has actually helped us all understand our roles better. You stood up for something important, and that example has resonated with many of us. After Matthews left, Camilla reflected on his words. She hadn't intended to become an example of anything. She'd simply been protecting a gift that mattered deeply. But perhaps that was how the best examples worked. They emerged from authentic moments rather than calculated gestures. Anne sent a photograph a few days later. She was wearing the butterfly brooch during a visit to a naval base. The sapphires caught the camera flash, sparkling brilliantly against her dark jacket. Anne had included a note with the photo. Wore Mother's butterfly today. Felt like she was with me. Thank you again for making sure this reached me safely. Camilla had the photograph framed and placed it on her desk alongside other family pictures. It served as a reminder of why she'd fought so hard that day in the corridor. The brooch wasn't just jewelry. It was a physical manifestation of love, thoughtfulness, and family connection. It was Elizabeth's voice reaching forward in time to tell her daughter that she was loved and remembered. Captain Thornberry's security reforms proved successful. The new digital logging system worked smoothly, requiring minimal effort while providing the documentation needed for insurance purposes. More importantly, it was based on trust rather than suspicion. Family members and senior staff understood the necessity of tracking valuable items and cooperated willingly with the new procedures. Several weeks after Anne's birthday, Camilla was scheduled to give a speech at a charity gala focused on literacy and education. As she prepared her remarks, she found herself thinking about the butterfly brooch incident in a new light. It had taught her something important about leadership and about knowing when to stand firm. In her speech that evening, she spoke about the importance of balancing rules with compassion, structure with flexibility. She didn't mention the brooch incident specifically. That would have been inappropriate for such a public forum. But the experience informed her words nonetheless. In any organization, whether it's a charity, a business, or even a family, she said to the assembled guests, we need guidelines and procedures, but we must never let those procedures overshadow the human element that makes everything worthwhile. Rules should serve people, not the other way around. The speech was well received, and several people approached her afterward to comment on how her words had resonated with them. One elderly woman, a longtime supporter of the literacy charity, squeezed Camilla's hand and said, You've really come into your own, my dear. The queen consort we see today is confident and compassionate in equal measure. Camilla thanked her, but the words stayed with her during the drive back to the castle. Had she really changed that much? Or had she simply become more comfortable showing who she'd always been underneath the careful public persona? Charles noticed her thoughtful mood when she returned. Successful evening? He asked as they prepared for bed. Yes, quite successful, Camilla replied. But I've been thinking about something that woman said about me coming into my own. Do you think I've changed since becoming queen consort? Charles considered the question seriously. I think you've always had strength and conviction. What's changed is your willingness to show those qualities more openly. When you first joined this family, you were so careful, always worried about making mistakes or causing offense. Now you trust yourself more. The incident with the brooch was a perfect example. The old you might have simply handed it over to avoid confrontation. The current you knew when to stand your ground. I was quite fierce, wasn't I? Camilla said with a small smile. You were magnificent, Charles corrected. And Anne will treasure that brooch even more knowing that you fought to protect it for her. As autumn deepened into winter, life at the castle continued its rhythm of public duties and private moments. Camilla attended countless engagements, shook thousands of hands, and gave dozens of speeches. She worked with her patronages, supporting causes she cared deeply about. She hosted state dinners and family gatherings with equal grace. But she also thought often about the butterfly brooch and what it represented. Elizabeth had left behind countless jewels, each with its own history and significance. But it was the thoughtfulness behind the gifts, the way she'd considered who would treasure each piece and why, that truly mattered. Camilla began her own careful inventory of items she might one day pass along. Not with any morbid thoughts about mortality, but with the understanding that meaningful gifts required planning and intention. She made notes about which pieces might suit which family members, thinking about their personalities and preferences. Christmas arrived, bringing with it the traditional royal gathering at Sandringham. The whole family assembled for the holiday, filling the estate with noise and laughter. Anne arrived wearing the butterfly brooch which everyone commented on admiringly. She caught Camilla's eye across the room and smiled, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. On Christmas afternoon, during a quiet moment when most of the family had gone for a walk, Anne sought out Camilla in the library. The Princess Royal carried a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," Anne said, sitting down beside her. "Consider it a very late birthday gift or an early Christmas present, whichever you prefer." Camilla opened the package to find a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. Inside, Anne had written a dedication, "For recording the stories behind the gifts we give and receive. Because thoughtfulness deserves to be remembered." "Anne, this is lovely," Camilla said, genuinely touched. "Mother kept journals for years," Anne explained. "Nothing fancy. Just notes about family events and the thoughts behind various decisions. I've been reading through some of them since she passed. They're incredibly precious to me now. I thought you might want to start your own tradition." Camilla ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover. "I'll treasure this." "Thank you." "Thank you," Anne replied, "for understanding that some gifts matter more than others, and for being willing to fight for what matters." As the holiday season continued, Camilla began using the journal. She wrote about Anne's birthday celebration, about the butterfly brooch and the confrontation with Officer Matthews. She wrote about the lessons learned regarding security protocols and the importance of balancing rules with humanity. She wrote about family connections and the ways love could transcend time through thoughtful gestures. The journal became a repository for moments that might otherwise be forgotten. Small kindnesses, important conversations, decisions made, and their reasoning. It was her way of honoring Elizabeth's legacy while creating her own. New Year arrived with its traditional celebrations and resolutions. Camilla didn't make formal resolutions. She'd never found them particularly helpful. But she did reflect on what the past months had taught her. She'd learned that being queen consort didn't mean being passive. It meant being thoughtful but firm, gracious but unwavering when necessary. The butterfly brooch incident had become a story told throughout the royal household, usually with humor and admiration. It had taken on a life of its own in the retelling, becoming somewhat more dramatic with each version. Camilla heard one account where she'd supposedly threatened to have the guards sent to the Tower of London, which made her laugh out loud. But beneath the humorous retellings, the incident had genuinely changed something in how people viewed her. She was no longer seen as just Charles's wife, carefully navigating her role. She was the queen consort, fully inhabiting that position with authority and confidence. Officer Matthews, who could have,